Welcome to Weekly Talkback. This is the show where we get to talk to Pastor Dave about his message on Sunday morning. This week, oh, by the way, I'm Kevin Beers.
And I'm David Whitten.
And this week, June 25th, 2023, Pastor Dave's message was entitled, What Good News Looks Like. So we're going to jump on in here. So Dave, in your message, you quoted Luke 4:18 to 19, and which says,
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoners, and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
And then you quoted from verse 21 saying,
Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.
and then you sum up all of that. There's a lot here.
Okay.
If in Luke, this was the signature statement to address to the church Jesus' ultimate concerns, then justice was at the very forefront of the gospel message. Jesus' main message, he claimed it himself, was to preach the good news. But the good news is all about justice, because justice is all about God's kingdom.
With saying all of that, here's the question. Since you say the good news is all about justice, what do you say to people who would say the good news is all about love?
That's not interrelated.
Well, I don't know. How are you looking at that?
Well, I would say that, let me just step back a minute and say, from the angle that we're talking about, and again, the angle that we're talking about is the question, was Jesus all about social justice? So when I used that text as his opening signature sermon, pretty much addressing what his ministry would be about, justice seemed to be at the forefront.
Okay.
Now, doesn't justice interrelate with love? I mean, if you are to love your neighbor as Jesus tells us to, doesn't that also include that the neighbor's place in society needs to be a place where justice occurs in his or her life? And so if you love that neighbor, you also want justice for that neighbor, and vice versa.
Okay. I actually looked at it a little bit differently. I was thinking about when you have a child who misbehaves, because you love them, that's where we're going to get into it in just a little bit.
Okay.
Where it's actually, I forget the term that you
Punitive?
used. Punitive. It's also punitive. So you punish or discipline your children because you love them.
Right.
So I was relating justice that way. So a little bit different from what you just said, but that helps me understand.
Okay, that's where I was coming from, but yeah. And I didn't, on the yesterday's sermon, I didn't expand on the punitive nature of God's justice.
Right.
And I could have, and that probably would have come around to some of the kind of maybe perspectives you were thinking of.
Okay. All right. So also in your message you said,
The way I figured it is, if it's good news to the poor, it's probably bad news to the rich. If it's good news to the oppressed, it's probably not very good news to the oppressor. And if it's good news to the captive, it can't be good news to the captive. God's justice, then, as we look at it from a biblical way, is both punitive and redemptive.
and I hope this next question doesn't take us down a rabbit hole,
I'll try to stay out of it.
but we'll see where we go here. There's a movement in Christianity called universalism, where the idea is that everybody is going to heaven, and it's a belief that ultimately God's love is so expansive that all people are going to be reconciled to God, and then therefore no one will be lost. Now, your message talking about being punitive, what are your thoughts on universalism versus kind of where you were going, or is there no relation?
Where was I going with that?
Well, you were saying it was both punitive because if it's good news.
Yeah, but that didn't necessarily mean that that person was going to go to hell.
Oh, okay. Well, let me pull in because I think you used this in one of your previous ones.
Okay.
The goats and the sheep.
Okay.
Where Jesus separates, or
Yes.
It's not Jesus who separates them, but the Father who separates the goats from the sheep. The goats are cast out. The wheat from the chaff. The chaff is tossed out. There seems to be a definite. There are people going to hell. That's what I get from the message. So.
Punishment, and that perspective is eternal punishment, as I understand it. That parable, which is in Matthew in chapter 25, Jesus uses it to talk about the end times.
Okay.
And then in that is just as the least you did unto these my brethren you did unto me, meaning that if you took care of the poor, you were ultimately taking care of Jesus, and if you weren't, you weren't. And so in that sense, punitive justice included the potential of eternal damnation.
Okay.
I think what Jesus was referring to, or what I was referring to when I said something to the effect that if good news is good to the poor, it's not going to be too good a news to those who keep the poor poor. I didn't necessarily mean that in an eternal way.
Oh, okay.
I meant that more in the way that, like in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus says, but woe to you who are rich. You have your comfort now, not necessarily later. Now, that may include an eternal aspect to it, or it may include sometime in your lifestyle, it's going to flip. Or not your lifespan, it's going to flip.
Okay.
You're going to find yourself down here, and the one that you were keeping poor up here. You may just find that.
Okay.
So, I wasn't differentiating between punishment here and now and eternal.
Oh, okay. That's why I'm glad we're talking about this, because I took it another way.
I really didn't think that much more. I was kind of thinking of the here and now. Jesus talks about the Jubilee. The year of the Jubilee, and that in the Jewish sense was when everything was restored back to the way it was originally.
Right.
So if I sold my land to you because I was desperate for money, and you bought that land from me, or I borrowed money from you to keep the land, at the end of 50 years, everything flattens out. That land comes back to me and my ancestors, or my descendants. Jesus talks about the year of the Jubilee in the sense that that's like heralds in God's kingdom in a way that everything is right. Somehow everything becomes right. So the poor becomes rich. I mean, they find their place, and the rich are knocked down to more of a equal level, I guess. Does that make any sense? Was that a rabbit hole?
It kind of was. But it was good because I understand your thinking on where you were coming from.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was seeing.
That's the whole point of the show.
Yeah. I was trying to convey the thought that at some point in time in the future, Jesus is going to come and herald in God's kingdom on earth. That was what it was going to look like. The poor would no longer be oppressed. Everything would be kind of, equalized, and I wasn't thinking of eternal punishment when I was saying that.
Okay. Now, the last thing I want to pull out here from your message, you said
biblical justice is about creating a just kingdom. It is a foretaste of God's kingdom yet to come. We are participants with Jesus, who heralded in God's kingdom. And as followers of Jesus, whenever we use our voice or action to fight the injustices of the world, whether it is human trafficking, economic exploitation, or the fight for basic human rights for all people, we are workers working for justice in God's kingdom.
What do you say to people who just feel like they're not in a position to enter that fight or to raise their voice?
Well, my question would be, why do they think they're not in a position? What would be the circumstances where they feel that they were not in a position to do that?
Okay, well, I guess the way I'm thinking is when you said like human trafficking. Well, I'm not in a position to do anything about that.
Oh, I see.
You know, because maybe what I was seeing was you call out some big things, and I'm not in a position to wrestle with those big things. So what are the small things? I assume that's where this was going to go. Was what are the small things you can do in the here and now?
Okay. I could have used some common, practical, everyday examples rather than these broad, swept kind of subjects. Yeah. Well, I see whatever injustices you see in your neighborhood, or whatever injustices you think a political candidate might really hope to resolve if they ever get voted into office. You could support, political decision making in terms of these areas.
Okay, so I just had a thought of one possibility. Because one of the things I was thinking was people might feel they're not in a position because, let's say, they live in an assisted living place.
Okay.
They don't get out or can't get out. But if they see someone mistreating someone else, they can speak up for that.
Absolutely.
So that would be that would be a way. Even if you're in a position where you can't even get out of your residence,
Exactly.
you have the ability to make a change.
Absolutely. I think that's
Okay.
a perfect illustration.
Okay, we should reduce the message. So anyway,
I'll let you preach next Sunday.
no.
Okay.
So that wraps it up for us. We want to know what you think about our discussion today, and actually what you think about the message from Sunday. And if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description so you can go listen to it. And let us know, again, what you think down in the comments, and we'll see you next week.
All righty. Take care.